Thanks for downloading this edition of The Y Factor from the BBC, a programme that seeks to find out why we do the things we do. I hope you enjoy it. BBC World Service. I'm Mike Williams with The Y Factor. Today, something you and I have in common. You and I were born, and you and I will die. Why do we so often refuse to contemplate the inevitable culmination of our lives? And why are we so often silent about death?
Death has been a big part of my life since I started at medical school, really. It's something we deal with day in, day out, and particularly in my line of work, about 10% of older people who come into hospital end up dying, so it's something we do every single day.
Dr. Kate Granger is 33 years old. She lives in the north of England and works with the elderly, most of them over 80, and with long-term complex medical conditions.
I don't like to be disconnected from my patients, so I try and put as much compassion into looking after people, particularly when they're dying, because it's such a difficult time. You need to connect with people's families and the people themselves, make sure their wishes are met and make sure that they all have as good an experience of such a difficult experience as possible.
Presently, he is having complaint is difficulty in swallowing.
Your plan is to prioritizing swallowing.
My name is Anjum Khan Jod. I work as a palliative care doctor in a cancer hospital in Jaipur, in Rajasthan. My role mainly is in taking care of patients who have cancer, who may not have a cure in sight. And in the year, our hospital sees around 14,000 to 15,000 patients. Around 30% of them will be seeing death soon, as in weeks to months or days to weeks. We have a lot of head and neck cancer, and those patients may survive for a couple of years.
What kind of conversations do you have with people when they get this terminal diagnosis?
It depends on the kind of person and on how fast the disease has progressed. If it is someone who's had a fairly long time battling the cancer and has had a fairly fulfilled life, they might be prepared for dying. Then they might ask, how will it be? Will I have difficulty breathing? Will I know? On the other hand, if you have somebody who's been diagnosed fairly recently, has had a very short time to come to terms with the reality, they may not accept the diagnosis and might still find ways to prove or disprove what they've been told. And then it's difficult for us to talk to them about their further course of treatment.
My name is Tony Walter, and I'm Professor of Death Studies at the University of Bath in England. Back in the 1990s, I wrote several books on this subject, and when I said I was writing a book on afterlife beliefs and also a book on funerals, they were fascinated, and they could talk for half an hour or so about the funerals they'd been to or what they think happens after we die. But then when I wrote a book on dying and another one on grief, nobody wanted to talk about it.
4 years ago to the day, actually, I was diagnosed with a very rare and aggressive type of sarcoma. I was on holiday in America and I suddenly became very ill with kidney failure. And the reason for that was that my tummy was full of tumours, and it was a very shock diagnosis out of the blue with no warning. And it's been a long, rocky road for the last 4 years. We've had 3 courses of quite intensive palliative chemotherapy that's made me very ill at the time, but my cancer has fortunately responded each time and given me some really good quality life in between. I've been able to work and do lots of other things, but it's never going to get better. I am going to die from this.
The Death Cafe is an opportunity for people to get together in a cafe environment and talk openly about death without people around them thinking they've gone completely mad. I've heard conversations about assisted suicide, dying after a long illness, perhaps cancer, about
Kate Sporer is a funeral celebrant, and she also organises these meetings where, over a cup of coffee, people can contemplate the end of life.
People talk about their own deaths and how they want to die. And the people who turn up can be young or old. Let's face it, it should have an appeal for everybody.
I know we're all going to die, but why do we have to talk about it?
Well, we don't have to talk about it, but I think if we do talk about it, we're possibly going to be better prepared. I'm mixed with lots of people who are used to talking about it, funeral directors and other people in my line of work. And you can talk about it quite easily. But I can see when I start talking about it to other people, you can see them squirming and becoming uncomfortable or welling up because they're actually thinking about my death.
I think 400 years ago said that death is like the sun. It's not to be looked at directly. You need a filter. And it's as though funeral rituals and afterlife beliefs are like a filter. They're a screen onto which you can project this glaring sun and look at it. But something that's as direct as actually personal grief or my own mortality might be a bit too direct.
Do you think we die differently these days? I wonder whether advances in medicine mean that we die in different ways.
Many of us may easily take months or even some years dying, what's often called a lingering dying. And that is a relatively new phenomenon. Until we had clean water, sewers, and then antibiotics, most people died of infectious diseases, and most infectious diseases would kill you within a week or two. So dying has stretched out, and that creates new challenges for people. I would certainly prefer to die in my 80s or 90s, even a fairly long, drawn-out death with a number of conditions and a degree of dementia, than to die in agony of cholera at the age of 32, which is how many, many people used to die in the West, or to die of malaria when I'm 5, which is how many people in Africa still die.
Our families tend to be very paternalistic about their patients, and our families do not allow us to deliver the full extent of the news to the patient himself. And the family screens and very often filters unwanted information and may modify that information before it reaches the patient. And we've had families saying that if you tell him today, he'll die tonight of the shock. And if you don't tell him, maybe we can bolster him up with some kind of hope and he'll live a few months longer. So you mustn't tell him the truth. And sometimes patient comes to you very late and you feel maybe he might live a few days. At that point of time, you feel it may not be worthwhile really being honest with him. And sometimes patients, especially the rural lady, you ask her that, do you want me to talk to you in greater detail about the condition, what medicines to take? She'll say, you talk to my husband, or you talk to my daughter, or you talk to my brother. So if patients give you that kind of answer, I feel maybe they don't want the full truth. They may have an inkling of what's going to come. So in that case, we don't thrust it upon them. In Islam, we are told that you should think of your death every day, because that will make you think of the afterlife, make you a better person, and be a better person. And even in Hinduism, patients come to us sometimes more accepting of their difficulties, saying that maybe it is my karma. Maybe I did something wrong in a previous life, and perhaps for that reason, I have been given this disease. So I used to believe that many Indians accept death as whoever is born will die. But when you face it yourself, I'm not so sure.
Some people have a faith that sustains them. They believe that death is not the end. What about you?
I was brought up in the Christian faith. I was christened and went to Sunday school, and we were married in church. And up until my early 20s, I was quite a devout Christian, I suppose. But since being diagnosed, I've kind of lost my faith a little bit. I don't really know why that is. I just don't find it all that helpful. But I do believe in something bigger. I do believe that I'll be there in some form. I thought my prognosis was going to be about a year when I was first diagnosed, but I'm still here 4 years later, so who knows when the end will come.
You were just 29 years old when the diagnosis came.
I was, yeah.
You've long had to deal with the death of others. How hard or easy is it to contemplate your own?
It's become part of our lives. It's something we think about probably every day, and it sort of sits there as this, we call it the cancer gremlin, that sits on my shoulder all the time, and sometimes he's quiet and sometimes it gives me a poke. And it's just, contemplating the end when you're 30 is really hard, because the people around me are all doing the things that 30-year-olds do, buying houses, getting married, having children, and we're kind of in this state of limbo where we obviously can't have children and we can't think about the future or buying our forever house or anything like that, and it's difficult. There's always that bittersweetness, like watching my nephews and niece grow up, knowing that I'm not going to be a part of their lives. Maybe they won't even remember me.
It must be saddening.
Yeah, it is, and we've shed a lot of tears, but then it's something that has just, like I said, become part of who we are.
Is there anger too?
Chris, my husband, has been angry, particularly at the beginning. There was a lot of, why Kate, why is this happening to us? I've never been angry because I guess I took a very clinical attitude to it. It's happened, I can't change it, we have to live with it and deal with it.
I like to think there are two ways in which cultures relate to their dead. One which you find in a lot of societies which engage in some sort of ancestral veneration. This would be true of a lot of sub-Saharan cultures in Africa, be true of some indigenous communities in northwest of America. It's true of a lot of the Far East, including, for example, Japan, where there is very much a sense that when you die, you become an ancestor. And it's the responsibility of the living to look after you, to ensure your well-being. And for example, I was visiting a middle-class Japanese family, and there was 3 of us, but the wife made 4 bowls of miso soup for breakfast. So I said, "Who's the 4th bowl for?" And she smiled and said, "Follow me," through to the next room. And she placed it on the Butsudan, which is the family ancestral shrine. So this was breakfast for the ancestors, so they could eat too. After breakfast, I helped her clear away the dishes, and I asked her, "Did the ancestors ever eat anything?" And she just smiled. Whereas in the East and in ancestral cultures, you relate to the dead by caring for them, and they guide you and look after you. In the West, our main language is of memory.
What goes on in your head when you consider your own mortality?
Depends on the day, really. I mean, I'm 66 at the moment and in good health, and both my parents lived to their early 90s. It's very difficult to know. I mean, a lot of people are more frightened of how they're going to die, of pain and discomfort.
I don't actually fear dying itself. I don't fear taking my last breath, but I do fear the symptoms that might be involved in the end of my life. Mainly because I've seen people die and can kind of look back on my career at people who've died in similar ways that might happen to me, and seen quite a lot of distress in my time, so that makes me frightened. I'm frightened of losing my independence. Even in the beginning, when I had lots of tubes sticking out of me, I was still up and about as much as I possibly could be, and the thought of becoming bedbound and people having to do things for me really, really scares me. And then my other big fear is what's going to happen once I'm gone. How is Chris going to cope? How is my family going to cope? And kind of the pain that'll cause to others when I do die.
People can fear death for all sorts of reasons. They may fear what comes afterwards, and that does have to do perhaps with how they're brought up in terms of religion. They may fear the physical anguish of dying. They very often fear leaving unfinished business.
At the moment, I have a 27-year-old lady who presented with stage 4 cancer and is inoperable. She knows the full truth of her diagnosis and her limited lifespan. But she still tells me that, can't I have 8 more years, 6 more years? So it's very difficult to talk to her because she's 27. On the other hand, I have an 84-year-old who is fairly okay with his status, and he's only worried about how increasingly dependent he is on his grandson. He's fairly sanguine about what's going to happen.
How would you like to die?
Go for a nice walk one day in my mid-80s, enjoy the birdsong and the fresh air and the view, be with a good friend, have a nice meal that evening and die in my sleep. That would be, for me, the perfect way to go. But in a way, I'd be a bit sorry if I died that sudden kind of death to miss out on the experience of dying. I'm kind of curious to know what it's like, because people very often do change when they have a life-threatening condition, and their values change, their priorities change. And I suppose it would be quite interesting to go through that, but as long as I wasn't in too much pain and discomfort.
As you said, you were told 4 years ago that you probably had a year to live. I guess the uncertainty must be difficult to deal with.
It is. It's something that is always there. I never know if that little twinge in my tummy is just nothing or whether it has a big significance and means that my cancer's progressing. I don't know, if I embark on any treatment, I don't know if that's going to work or not. I don't know if the next infection's going to be the one that finishes me off. It's just that constant uncertainty of not knowing, and we've kind of lulled everybody into a false sense of security because I've defied the odds for such a long time that I think people think I'm indestructible, but I'm not, and this cancer is going to kill me, and it's only a matter of time, really. It's very much changed both Chris and I's lives into a live for the day philosophy. We live with this 3-month window, and we make sure that we fill that 3-month window with as much positive things as we possibly can. I find it very hard to look forward any further than that.
Do you have any idea how much time?
I don't. There are some signs lately that things are perhaps getting a bit worse, and I'm just contemplating what to do about that at the moment. When I'm actually dying, I'd really like to die to The Lark Ascending by Vaughan Williams.
Have you made practical preparations for your death?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a control freak, so I've made quite detailed plans for the ends. I've got my death box, as I call it, that's got the music I'd like in it and candles and some of the books I'd like Mum to read to me.
Sounds like you're preparing a deathbed.
Yeah, I am, I guess. I have a serene picture of my deathbed that people that I love will be with me, and I will have the music and stories and familiar smells around me that will comfort me. I really do hope I have a peaceful death at home.
Thanks for listening to The Y Factor. If you'd like to hear more editions, there's a wide range of programmes on our website. Everything from home to nationality, nudity to nostalgia, the moon, and much more. Visit bbcworldservice.com/Y Factor.